struggling to get your team on board with change, you're not alone, and this episode will shift how you lead through it. In this conversation with change expert Evie Staples, we explore a powerful truth. Change isn't just operational, it's human. What feels simple at the top can feel overwhelming to your team. We break down how great leaders navigate change with empathy, clarity, and intention, turning resistance into trust and momentum. Because when you get change right, you don't just avoid friction, you unlock performance. Okay. Well, hello, Evie. I'm going to try to be as professional as possible today, but I honestly say that loosely, and I think you and I both know it's a lie. I cannot contain my excitement to have you on this episode. And the reason, for those that don't know Evie Staples, we had the privilege of working together many years ago. And when I was thinking of how I was going to introduce you today, just knowing our history, I think it's important that I share the impact you had, probably unknowingly at the time, on what shaped me as a leader when I approach change management with people within organizations. You to date are the most significant expert when it comes to change management, in my opinion. And I'll be honest, I think this is the number one thing leaders and organizations continue to get wrong. And I believe it's because of their lack of understanding of the importance of understanding effective change management and really how that impacts the individuals involved with those initiatives. So I'll say this. I know, I mean, I could go on for an hour, but I'm not going to. I'll say this. For anyone that might be listening that's curious about this, if you have ever had an initiative fail or you're wondering why you can't get momentum or traction in your own business, you need to listen to this goddess right here. Okay. So I'm bowing down. If you don't mind, for those that don't know you, can you share a little bit of your professional journey and how you went from early leadership roles to founding Empower the Future and really specializing in strategic change?
Yes, I would love to. First, I want to say, Bridget, it is such a huge honor. You're still one of my favorite leaders. I think it's been a decade since we've worked together. I have watched your impact live. So for you to say that I'm in any way significant, when you were so significant to me, is like the most cherished irony of my life. So thank you for having me on your podcast. Thank you for having me on your platform. I appreciate you so much. You're just like my favorite. You're the best. So thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so for anybody that doesn't know me, my name is Evie. I'm a wife, I'm a mom. I love change management. I love change management because I hate change. And that's like the big secret that nobody ever realizes about people who work in change management. It really is exposure therapy for me. And I think that's one of the reasons that I dove so deep into it as a career is because I know for people who struggle with change how difficult the process is. For me, it's a midwifery of sorts from one stage to another because change can make you feel like you can't do it. Change can make you feel like the thing you set out to do, you're not qualified to do. It runs deeper than negative self talk, it runs deeper than managing your team and the grief process of that happens with change, things you didn't realize that you were attached to, that you probably are. It really intersects with organizational psychology in a beautiful way, in that organizational psychology plus business outcomes marry to create change management in my mind. And so I started out always being someone who loved helping people get to the other side, whatever that other side was. I love helping them transition and build and grow. And I always had a knack for finding a creative business way to do it. And so I started as an intern coming up with this rapid way. So my first 7 years were in finance. I worked in the financial industry long before I came to
I
regular,
don't see it.
which is crazy.
You're
But
too animated. No, I'm just,
right, which is why I'm not there. I was way too out of the box.
yeah.
That creativity really was able to help the industry that I was in accelerate in an insane way. And so I found myself out of college getting an internship and then speaking nationally on Wall Street to all of these business leaders on how to navigate change. At my age, I was like, I think I was like 22 at the times. I ended up teaching them how I grew so fast, not realizing that there was a science behind it and not realizing that I could make my natural inclination a career.
Yeah.
Someone there who was a global senior change director at the time saw me and was like, "This girl does change management," and poured into me. That organization invested in me getting certified. I was double certified before 25, so top 3% in the world at the time, certified in this. And I had from there to now, I won't say how old I am now, but there's some grace underneath this, but I had from then to now to work in the field, to work my skills, to work the science, to figure out where the science works and sometimes where the science doesn't work, and then navigate these things to create an ecosystem of transformation that I think time and time again has bode well for the people that I've been able to interact with and that I've been lucky to interact with. And so my start was always being in change management, but not knowing that it was, and then getting into it as a field and as a career, doing it in the financial industry. Then I moved into veterinary medicine, which is where I was lucky to meet you. And then I moved into supply chain, and I did a lot of work in supply chain for about 4 or 5 years. Then I opened Empower the Future. Now, I want to tell you
Yeah.
how change and Empower the Future came about. So I'm in my final post and my life just upends, right? I am building out a center of excellence at this organization
Mhm.
and I get married, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Years now. I get married, and then about a couple of months after I get married, I find out I'm pregnant, and then my dad passes away, and it breaks my heart. And I'm navigating that and trying to deal with grief, trying to learn my body. This is a first time pregnancy for
Yeah.
me. I've never gone through any of this before. And then my mom gets sick, and she starts to dwindle. And I'm building this center of excellence while my life is feeling very non excellent,
Mm.
and I'm delivering excellence, but not feeling it inside. And I'm having to take all of the change management stuff and manage the change of what my life means without my dad, manage the change of what it means to be pregnant now, and manage the change of fighting for my own life because I had a really difficult pregnancy and
Mm.
fighting for my mom's.
Mm.
And so, for all the times I was in the hospital on the phone making decisions for my mom, but I was also in the hospital for myself. And we're in two different rooms, and
Mm.
I'm trying to navigate and delegate and go through what I'm going through. It reminds me of every leader that has bled out and is
Mm.
still leading others,
Right.
that is actively bleeding out, that is actively hurting and still showing up every day and leading others. And I'm going through this, and my mom ends up passing
Mm.
about 19 days before I gave birth. So I was
Ugh.
deleted at her funeral, and now I'm an orphan. I'm an orphan and a parent in the same month.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think the organization I was in was also going through a massive transition. And so they didn't have the opportunity to be their best. I didn't have the opportunity to be my best. And all of this stuff that I had been doing all this 15, 16 years became real in my real life. And I realized something really profound at that moment. What I do runs so much deeper for me than a career and a job. This is what I'm called to do with my life. The thing that I do helps people not sustain damage on the road to their own greatness, which can happen to so many of us. We're brave, we get on that road, we take the darts, we take the hits, we never learn how to recover. We never learn what it means for our own survival. And many of us are lost on that journey. We get there, but we lose ourselves, or we lose the fabric of our organizations, or we lose everything we thought we stood for. We look around and we're like, who am I? And not in a good way. And so I realized kind of after I came out of that moment and recovered, and the organization I was with ended up going through a significant transition and redoing their entire organization. I realized that I want to help organizations on my own terms.
Mm.
So I started November 2024. I started Empower the Future. Since then, I have grown to work all over the country. with different clients, with different organizations, both individually, organizationally. We have grown into a boutique change management firm. We work with a lot of consulting firms now to help their clients. So
Mm.
consulting firms that go in and underbid your big four, but they need the people to actually come in and help.
Right.
They call me and I come in as a member of that firm and I help them get the change over the hill. I have an amazing team of 4. We're all superstars, we all work together, we're all women, and, we come from all different backgrounds and beliefs and perspectives, and it brings this beautiful tapestry to the organization where everyone's perspective, but also their pain, informs how they love and care for the clients that we serve.
Yeah.
I have folks on my team who understand what it is. I understand grief. Some of them understand what it is to be in marginalized spaces and not have safe space for their identities. And so they help me derive empathy-based support
Mm.
for those needs.
Mm.
We are able to bring all of our emotions and feelings and backgrounds to the space to learn how to help others going through the same or similar things. And so I say that to wrap up this very long answer to your question. I say that to say every leader, if you have gone through something, you know change management
Yeah.
instinctively. You know it. If you've gone through something, if you've felt lost in any way, if
Mm.
you have been in a moment in your life where you had no idea what was next and no idea how to pick up, and you had to figure out what day one of a completely upended life looks like, you're a change manager.
Yeah.
You have managed the changes of your life, and you have done so successfully because you're still here.
Mhm.
So every single one of us, by virtue of surviving everything we've been through, have a track record of successful change management. I'm excited to awaken the inner change expert within everyone because we all are.
Mm.
And the science of what I know really just illuminates what you instinctively have survived and allows you to survive the next thing even better, even stronger without having to suffer as much because change doesn't require suffering as much as we assume that it does. That's where I'm living my life now is I'm fortunate to live my life by my passion, and my passion is change management. So I'm grateful to be here and get to talk about it.
Well, I am grateful that you're in that space. You so eloquently explained your own journey, and it just continues to prove what a pillar of strength you are. But the fact that you were able to turn pain into purpose and not let that break you. And again, it goes back to, I don't know if we were recording when I had said it, but for me, you're always a beacon of light. Like truly, it's like you find how, and maybe that's part of the change management component, right? Of it can get very dark and feel very scary and go very wrong, but you bring it back on track on how to stay focused, remember the goal, the vision, and as you've said, successfully implement change in a way that doesn't have to hurt. With that in mind, from your vantage, what do you think is the biggest misconception leaders have about change?
Everyone's going to go through the change like they do.
Okay.
I think a lot of times leaders who have to make the decision about change have had a lot of time with it. They've had a lot of time to sit with the idea. It hasn't been shared with the organization yet. They've had a lot of time to sit with the idea. They've had a lot of times to weigh the pros and cons. They've had a lot of time to understand the inconvenience of the change and the cost benefit of it, and that cost benefit will outweigh those inconveniences. They have had a lot of time to convince themselves. And then they show up to the organization and they think a good, strong communication and
Mhm.
a big old rah rah is going to get them on board
Right.
and make them immediately do the thing. And then when the organization doesn't do that, they interpret it personally. It means something about me as a leader because I couldn't get my team on board,
Mhm.
or my organization just doesn't understand, or the people who are raising the red flag are the bad apples. You have to understand when you are giving birth to something in an organization as a leader, everything about that birthing process is different than normal. This is why I like to call myself a proverbial midwife, although
Mhm.
honor to all real ones. I could never be as amazing as the real one. But if you are a midwife birthing something into the world, that mama is yelling at you. right? She is hollering for her life.
Mm.
She is telling you her feelings. She is illuminating them, and she's saying things she may never say. You're seeking things you may never see.
Right.
That environment, the ecosystem of birthing something is different than your everyday ecosystem. And so when you can expect different behaviors than the everyday behaviors, you've got to understand that someone may be feeling the pain much differently in their individual role
Mm.
than you have as a leader looking at it for the whole. For the whole, you may say this is going to create 20% disruption. That 20% may be isolated to a small group of people, and for them, it's 100%.
Mhm.
So then you have to think, I can't judge them by them not having a 20% reaction. I
Mhm.
can't say that their reaction's overinflated. Their metrics are different than mine. And so when you understand that you are in the delivery room of your vision, then the ecosystem that you curate, the environment that you curate allows your organization to deliver excellence in transition in a way that they otherwise would not. The other thing that leaders misunderstand is that, and I think you're assuming it now from hearing me, but a lot of leaders don't think that it requires intentionality. They think it requires compliance. This is not a matter of compliance. When you are shifting an organization and changing an organization, a lot of times you are making up the rules as you go. So what can they be compliant to? So a lot of times it isn't just saying, get on board, people. On board with what? I don't have a clear understanding of what the future is. I don't understand how to be my best in this future. I understood the ladder over here, so I knew how to climb it. I don't understand this ladder. I don't understand how to be excellent. I don't understand what that means. Oh, and by the way, all of the fears that hit all of us when a change comes in. What does this mean for my life? Am I going to lose my job? What does this mean for my family? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that?
Mm.
Will, when I say, hey, this doesn't work for this system, will I be seen as the complainer when I'm actually the one that cares the most?
Yeah.
And how many times, and that's the other thing is like leaders, I feel like we forget that most often, most leaders, especially in the veterinary industry, if you come into leadership in the veterinary industry, you have done almost every other role. You've done like at least 4 or 5 of them. So a lot of times, and then same with supply chain, that's a very common thing is people have done all the roles. Very few, now there are some industries where you come in and you just come into a position, but for most of them, you have worked about 4 or 5 of them. You have to remember what it meant when you were on that hourly check or when you were an expert of that individual thing and you were budgeting for these experiences and now you're scared. You have to remember what it means when you were the expert at something and you're not being asked to be the expert at this new thing, and that makes you feel invisible. If we can predict and foresee, and you can, every one of us can, an organizational behavior can be predicted by an individual's behavior. If something makes me feel invisible at the individual level, something is going to make me feel unheard at the organizational level. If something makes me feel like danger is happening or unsafe at the individual level, it's going to be resistance at the organizational level. So you can think about how something makes you feel and you can predict the organizational trends. Now, the third thing that a leader misses is that organizational trends have business outcome impacts. This is where we really miss it. Because what happens is they say change management, CHAR, culture, transformation, all of these things are moral importance. They are, but they have dollar signs. So if someone takes a long time to adjust to something that you've adopted and you're expecting a certain ROI to kick in at a certain quarter at a certain time, and they are delayed behind that, now you're in the hole longer than you expect it to be. Now you're dipping into reserves. And if you keep people in transition long enough, too long, now you're dealing with attrition. Experts are leaving the organization. You're having to restaff. You're restaffing way more than you anticipated that you had to. And even though you think you're collecting the FTE save, you're not, because they're coming into a culture of fear and everyone's scared. People are now just doing the latest thing that they heard. Or then what happens is you can't take the heat, so you change again. So the organization learns, I'm just going to hold out until you change right back because you're going to change right back. So all of these things impact how your organization is able to recover and reset and exponentially grow in the way that you expect it to when you first had the vision. If I had to say those 3 things, it's like you think everyone's gonna think like you do. You think that it just requires complicity and not actual intentionality. And lastly, the 3rd thing I just said, that you think it's a good thing to do, but that it doesn't necessarily have business impact.
It makes sense, and again, I point back to working with you and kind of the lessons you taught us in effective change management, and what I continue to see time and again, it goes back to, I think, just a lack of awareness or understanding that that's even a skill set. Number one, you raise a few points. You talk about maybe the key decision makers having the opportunity to sit with that change and digest that sometimes for months before it's introduced to, let's say in vet med, the hospital team. But beyond that, you have to consider what I would call the telephone game of, okay, so maybe the initiative and the objective and the why and the how and all of the things was crystal clear in the boardroom. Now we've gone to a regional VP. Now we've gone to a regional manager. Now we've gone to an associate manager. And now we've gone to the hospital leadership, who then have to communicate that with the hospital teams. I believe that unless you have that clear cut communication strategy and the resources and materials to continue to assert that the message does not lose its strength or momentum,
Yeah.
what does the person in the kennel end up hearing, right? And I have to tell you, I think it's a much shortened version that sometimes what could maybe be a good initiative makes the team not understand that it is because of that breakdown along the way. But also to your point, in a lot of cases, it's thrown at them where it's like, and you're starting this tomorrow. Even though there were months of conversation and planning, well, let's let it sit with the team for a minute. And I've always been a proponent of dynamic tension, of when time allows, let's beta test. Let's get a group of early adopters to break it. Tell me what I'm missing from their vantage, just as you've explained. And maybe we modify it slightly. Maybe we learn the timeline needs to be longer to implementation, but it's going to be more successful. So, with that said, from your professional opinion, what do you believe distinguishes a successful transformation from an initiative that stalls out or fails?
Ooh, Bridget, you already answered that question beautifully. By the
Oh,
way, that's exactly the thing, which is why I say, like, all the best leaders are great change leaders. Like, that is exactly right. I want to deep dive, if I can, on
yeah,
what you're talking about with communication and change,
yes.
because that is so important. What happens is, let's say you at the very top, your vision is, I believe that this is going to make us a lot of money and allow us to help a lot more. And
Mhm,
it's going to help and heal and be good, and it's good and it's profitable. And those 2 things go together, this is the right decision. Or I believe it's consistent with our values. That's enough for you to make a decision.
mhm,
And that's enough to convince the board. What does that have to do? And let's stay in vet med as an example. What does this have to do with the doctors who don't care about that? They care about good medicine. They care about not being forced to use a suture that they used once and it didn't work. And maybe a life was lost as a result. And now you're making them use that suture because you cut a deal on it. So you're a sellout to me. I don't care how good this is. We're being direct here. We have to be direct to understand their perspective, to overcome it, to get them on our side and to get them to adopt this change. So do we or don't we make it a requirement as a result of that? At every stage of the organization, what we call the WIFM, the what's in it for me, at every stage of the organization, the WIFM is different than the initial reason that you were sold.
mm,
You have to ask yourself, what sells the everyday kennel person who's doing great work, by the way, and hates that they're thrown into this change consistently?
yeah.
and loves the way that their hospital runs and doesn't want that to change
Yeah.
because they've seen unsuccessful changes before.
Mm.
And they've all been in this business 5, 10 years or more. So they've seen it all, done it all, and they know what's coming that's good or that's not, and they can predict it.
Mm.
What are you saying to them? It can't be the same thing that you're saying to the board. The communication level, what you're communicating, and what you're selling as the benefit has to be unique to each level,
Mm.
which is why, to my second point, what you said about dynamic tension is so profound. Because in an ecosystem that allows you to pilot a change, you hear from every level of the organization within that pilot. Tell me what you don't like. That turns into QRGs, FAQs, and preemptive resistance plans. Tell me what you did like, what got easier for you. That turns into benefits needs analysis by organization, WIFMs by rung, because you're actually talking to the kennel worker and they're going, I didn't like this, but I had more time to take care of the pets. So I'm glad I got more time in this. Dear lovely kennel, you will have more time in this. Our friend Sarah, who piloted it, said this. Can we quote you? This is what she said.
Mhm.
Because I want to hear from my own folks. Don't come down from the sky and tell me that this is good for me when you don't understand what my day to day is like. Now, mind you, many of these leaders started in multiple roles. Maybe some of them were those roles. However, we're not talking about what your experience is. We're talking about how you're being seen. And you're being seen as the person that came down from the sky and is enforcing and imposing your will to upend their whole life with no consideration. Now, the beautiful thing is, if we know that that is the reaction every time,
Mhm.
because these reactions don't change, humans have the same fundamental set of reactions for everything. And so if we know that a certain set of behaviors are automatically triggered with a certain set of impetus or impetus, then what we can do is we can control for that. We can eliminate some of that discomfort. We can preemptively understand, empathize, and build it out so that they feel like, even though I'm uncomfortable, this is a safe place for me to land and I'm going to take this step. Maybe I don't come down from the sky and announce it. Maybe I have the doctor announce it.
Also, just from my own experience, feel like when you have the runway to beta test or to play around with the idea, um, again, just personally, that's usually when we have the most successful implementation. However, it also contributes to that key necessity of trust and rapport in a relationship. Meaning, yes, as operational leaders, there will be instances where maybe there's an initiative that we don't have the time to play around with it. But if we've had 5 others where we did and they were successful because of the back and forth with the team and the input and the buy in and the training and the time to adapt, I feel like they're more understanding if you can explain the why this one we can't play around with. And even in the event that that one fails, I feel like you are given more grace as a leader because it's like, well, you know what? I know Bridget would have tested this if she could have. So for whatever reason, we trust that we just had to go and try to knock this one out of the ballpark, and that's okay. Whereas if you don't have that runway or really the focus on the relationship and the trust, there's no rapport. So they hate you every time you mess up. And you mentioned it time and again. I promise you, it's why even bother? They're going to change their mind next month, anyways. If any of this conversation resonated with you, you won't want to miss part 2, dropping April 2nd, where change management expert Evie Staples will continue sharing best practices on successful change initiatives.